Hi, welcome to another episode of Home Studio Workshop. My name's John Greene, and this is going to be about mastering. Audio mastering. During the hideousness of the lockdown, I've been doing a lot of mastering, and I've learned some things that I didn't know, if you follow me. So I'm going to do this little thing about my method of mastering, and I point out that this is my method. There are probably lots of others. Before I move into the actual video of me doing this task, there's a few things I need to say about the whole process of recording, which obviously ends up with mastering. It's all got to be done right from the start. Whatever kind of audio you're turning out, the same rules apply. Record it well in the beginning. Do not skimp on recording. Make sure you know how to record and record it right at the right levels. Remember, if you're using virtual instruments, that these levels are different in there. The velocity in a virtual instrument is not the same as volume. It's just giving you a different sound. If you record a snare drum in, say, Superior Drummer at 50, it'll go bonk. It'll be the sound of a snare drum hit quietly. If you record it at 100, it will then be the sound of a snare drum hit quite hard. If you record it at 127, it'll be a mighty whack on a snare drum, and they sound different. This is not volume, it's the sound. So you have to alter the volume somewhere else. After you've done your recording, gain staging. Make sure you do that right. For that you will need a VU meter. If you haven't already got one, I recommend a thing called MV meter, which I'll put a link to somewhere. Maybe up there, I haven't decided yet. I just don't know. Anyway, you need that. Remember, what people had forgotten up until a few years ago in the home studio world is that all the plugins you use are based on analog hardware. And all of those units used VU as a means of setting the right level. All the meters in your DAW will be peak meters, and they are not the same thing. VU is an average, and peak meter is what it says it is, peak. And they are not the same thing. A VU meter reading of 0 is a dB reading of -18 or thereabouts. So you've got to be setting your levels to the VU meter to get the right level for the plugin to operate properly. Drums are different because drums can't be averaged. You hit a drum, bang, that's just one sound. You can't average that out like you would a boom, 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 boom bass sound. So the drum settings will be lower. The rough rule of thumb is -10 for a kick drum, -7 for a snare, -5 for a tom-tom, and -20 for cymbals. That kind of works. Get used to doing that. Make sure your DAW meters are set to either input or output, whichever it is you require at the time. I didn't realize for a long time that there was a choice, or why, but now I do. When you do your first mix, go right back to basics, have everything set off apart from the vocal, if you've got a vocal, and then add maybe kick, maybe bass, and then build up on top of that. But just with level and pan and no effects and nothing else until you get some kind of rough mix, and then proceed. It will be easier. When you get to making your stereo master, make sure that it peaks at around 5 or 6 and no more. That gives plenty of headroom to improve things in the mastering process. Great rule of thumb right from the start is that if you record properly, it makes your gain staging easier. If you gain stage properly, it makes mixing easier. And if you mix properly, then it makes the mastering easier. It's all one process from beginning to end. So let's move on and see what's going on in the great world of mastering. Okay, a couple of things I wanted to clear up whilst you're actually looking at them, as opposed to just having me talk about them. And that's the gain staging and the rough balancing and mixing kind of side of things. So let's have a look at that a minute. The way I start for gain staging is to play the track without any volume on, and this is Cubase 5, and with it set to show all meters, which is there. And as you can see, they leap up. 6 is here. And that's where you want it to peak, no more than there. Anything above that line, Cubase is good for this because it handily goes into red if it goes above that line. So you just play through the whole track without listening to it, and you will see anything that's poking out, and then you can adjust the volume of it like that. So that works very well. Okay, now the VU meter is here. It's MV meter. I put a link to it earlier, but it's quite good, I think, so go get it. Let's start with the vocal. You don't have to listen to it. It's always a thankless task. Anyway, we're just going to solo the vocal. As you can see on the VU meter, the vocal is probably a bit quiet, but you can tell exactly what it's doing on the VU meter, and it doesn't want to be any more than 0. It can be above 0 because, like I said, this is minus 18 dB. So, but that's where this area here is where all your plugins are happy. This is the point. Okay, so we stop that. Let's have a solo kick. This is the kick drum now. As you can see, the kick on the VU is way down. Quick rule of thumb, as I said earlier, kick 10, snare 7, toms 5, cymbals right down low. Let's just run the hi-hats a minute instead, and you'll see that they are running at minus 20, which is about right. So that is that. Now, what I do with mixing is I set everything flat, completely flat, and then I turn everything down like this. Boring work. Nearly there, don't worry. And leave the Vox. And I start with the Vox. Love who you want to love. And then add the kick, maybe the snare, maybe a little bit of hats just to give it some rhythm. And then I would add the bass, and then I would start adding the pretty stuff and just build it up from there. Mastering. I'll try and keep it as simple as possible, and I'm going to use as little audio as I can also, because it's so subjective. I'm using Isotope Ozone 5 for this, but it doesn't really matter much what you use. You're going to need some kind of equalizer, some kind of dynamics. Multiband is very useful. Some kind of stereo imaging, if only to listen to mono, and obviously some kind of maximizer to get it up to the right volume. Let's start with the equalization. I'll just play a bit of the track a minute. This is one of my songs. This is a stereo master. Do what you want to do. As you can see, it's not a large file in terms of loudness. It's around -6, something like that. It's not loud at all. It might have peaked at -4 there for a minute. I don't know. But it's acceptable. Various things that are complicated about setting up the volumes and everything for isotope, but it's too complicated to go into here. I'm just talking about a basic method here. And we don't want anything else, do we? Okay, so equalization. Mid-side is a fantastic thing. Not stereo, not left-right. Mid-side. Where you want to start is with the sides and solo the sides, and this is what you hear. This is what's actually happening. First thing I always do is cut a high pass back to about 100, somewhere like that, 146 this one's set on. And then the great thing about ozone is that if you push the Alt button down, you just hear whatever frequency your cursor is at, like this. So you can find a nasty frequency, something that upsets you. That upsets me. That's a 1400. Double click and drag that frequency down a little bit and it will disappear. Then you do exactly the same thing with the mids. In other words, what is happening in the middle and nowhere else. And keep your friends close to you. Bit of a high pass. Give what you have. Alt. Find a frequency you hate. Mud. There's mud. 401. Make a thing. Cut it. That's the principle. Okay, moving on. Dynamics. Turn it on. I have 3 bands set up here. The very bottom end, the middle frequencies, and the top end. What the dynamics does, it's just like any compressor. It turns down the loud bits and turns up the quiet bits. In other words, it glues it together. We're running on quite small amounts of 3 to 1 for the bottom end, 2.5 and 2, which is very low compression rates. Then you don't want very much. The way I do it is I run that, and as you play the track, drag the threshold up or down so that the waveform is just above. That's a bit low, just so that the display thing just creeps down to hitting where the music is. If you get me, like that. And you do that for each of them. And that's that done. Stereo imager. All this does, same bands. This here will narrow the effect, the stereo effect on the bottom end. This one will narrow by pulling it down or widen by pushing it up the stereo effect in the middle, and this one the same on the top end. So you can adjust the width of the stereo. I always tend to run the middle bottom end, in other words the bass and the kick drum, I always try to run them just a bit down, 20% down, something like that, so it brings the kick and the bass much more defined into the middle of the mix. And then the top end I spread a little bit, but that's really all I do. The other good thing here is that you can listen to it in mono, which is a very good thing.
what you want to do.
Listening to it in mono will throw up problems that you didn't know you had. So you've recorded a piano and you've panned it left and right really wide, which has actually happened to me on a recording the other day. It was a live recording, so it was kind of done that way on purpose. And once again, live recording, once it had been done, it was done, and that was the end of that. But because it was panned hard left and hard right, when I put the mono button on, the piano disappeared from the mix entirely. So you want to be careful that you don't get that. Okay, so we move on to the maximizer. Turn that on. What this does is make your mix suitably louder. And to cut it very short and make it very simple, this is the threshold. You drag it down to make it louder. The way you know how loud you want to be is by turning on the meter bridge, set to levels, and the LUFS is the important thing. I'll just play a bit of this a minute. 4 settings down here. There's the momentary loudness, which will give you some idea of how loud it is totally. The short term, which is like a short term average. The full on average, which is this one. This is the most important one, integrated. And the loudness range. Now, this is set to, I've tried to set to 15 is kind of my maximum, but anywhere between 20 and 15, 15 being loud, 20 being quieter. For the kind of music I make, anything between 20 and 15 is acceptable. If it's too quiet, if this is too quiet, then you go back to here and turn this up until it's better. Don't go too far, again, small amounts. And basically, that's how I master. See you later.